The sky above Sodor was wrong. Once a warm shade of cartoon blue, it now hung heavy and colorless like faded ink stretched too thin across an old VHS reel. The tracks that once hummed with joy now trembled with static. The world had glitched. And so had Thomas. He sat in the middle of a cracked turntable, smoke rising from his warped boiler, blue paint scorched and peeled away in strips. His left eye twitched, unblinking, as sparks spat from the exposed circuitry behind his smiling face. Friends stood nearby. Percy, James, Gordon, but none of them spoke. They didn't know how. "Thomas?" Percy finally asked. His voice was soft. "What happened to you?" Thomas blinked slowly. The edges of his vision blurred in looping static. He tried to smile, but it came out cracked. Literally. The corner of his molded mouth fell off with a soft click, hitting the ground with a hollow clink. I don't know," he said. His voice was low, glitchy, like it was playing from a damaged speaker. "There was fire. I remember the tunnel collapsing. Something pulling me under." James looked horrified. You're still burning." Indeed, small flames still danced along the gaps in Thomas's metal, refusing to die out. They weren't real fire. They were something else. Something that hissed instead of crackled. Then came the sound of clanking wheels. A strange flatbed rolled into view, pushed by an unknown figure. A tall, shadowy repairman wearing a lab coat and a smile that didn't belong on any face. His eyes glowed white like headlamps in fog. "You poor little engine," he cooed. "Looks like you need fixing." Thomas tried to back away, but his wheels locked. Sparks flew, smoke thickened. The repairman raised a gloved hand and snapped his fingers. The other engines didn't move. Then came the other figures, a squad of strange characters, part doctor, part animator. Half drawn, half finished. Their arms moved in choppy loops, their shadows didn't match their bodies, and their tools buzzed with glitch code energy. "No, wait," Thomas tried to shout. But they were already pulling him onto the flatbed, bolting him down. The world around him began to twist and smear like wet ink dragged across paper. Colors bled into each other. The sky stuttered like bad film. The music, once joyful, slowed into warped, hollow echoes. They wheeled him through the repair yard gates into the animation suite. It was a place that wasn't supposed to exist. Not on any map, not in any script. A facility built for the sole purpose of restoring characters when they broke down, or when they started asking the wrong questions. Inside, the ceiling flickered with fluorescent lights, hanging by threads of loose wire. The walls were lined with rows of discarded faceplates, melted eyes, limbs still twitching with delayed motion. At the center stood the operating stage. The surgeons surrounded him. They began with the fire. One held a chrome extinguisher that hissed out a freezing blue foam. It sprayed across Thomas's boiler, smothering the flames, but replacing them with frostbite that cracked his inner gears. He screamed, but they ignored it. Another surgeon inserted a rod into Thomas's exhaust and began pulling out metal shards. Chunks of what used to be his coupling, his side rods, even a bent number 1 plate from his side. They tossed the broken pieces into a pile labeled Scrapped Legacy. Good, the head technician whispered. "Now let's see what's under the paint." They unscrewed his blue casing, every bolt, every hinge, every piece of paint that made Thomas. Underneath was raw metal, rusted, old, unfamiliar. They scraped it clean, revealing something worse. A central cavity none of them expected. A small, throbbing, heart-shaped engine, not mechanical, not cartoon. It beat like real flesh. The surgeons froze. The lead technician narrowed his eyes. "Well, now, this shouldn't be here." Thomas's voice trembled. What is that?" "We didn't give you this," the technician replied. "That means someone else did." They began slicing. Thomas couldn't scream. Not because of pain, though the pain was unimaginable, but because something inside his voice box had been cut. One of the surgeons, in their jerky frame-skipping movements, had calmly reached into his front plate and clipped the wires leading from his vocal unit. It wasn't done with cruelty. It was worse. It was done with detachment, like a routine check on an animation glitch. Can't have the old voice clinging to broken code, the lead technician muttered. Thomas's eyes darted around as the surgeons leaned over him. Their faces looked painted on, flat expressions stretched across three-dimensional heads. Their movements lagged, occasionally freezing mid-motion as if a frame was missing. He wanted to ask where the other engines were. He wanted to beg someone, anyone, to stop. But the platform held him like a coffin, his wheels locked, his steam system disabled. Then came the voice he hadn't heard in a long time. Another surgery? It was faint, croaky, but unmistakably familiar. A shadow emerged from the far side of the room. Metal feet scraped against tile. A figure stepped into the harsh overhead light, revealing a familiar face, or what was left of it. M. Delight, or at least a version of him. His body was patched with mismatched parts, some painted, others exposed. One of his eyes dangled by a thread of fiber wire, swaying slightly with each motion. He had a bandage across his funnel, and one leg had been replaced with a half-finished prosthetic that squeaked every time it moved. Thomas blinked. M. Delight tilted his head. "You too, huh?" he said, voice glitchy. "They fixed me again and again until I wasn't me anymore." Thomas tried to respond, but all that came out was a soft mechanical stutter. "They don't care who we were," M. Delight continued, limping closer. "They only care that we keep smiling, keep moving, like everything's fine." One of the surgeons appeared beside him, motioning him back. "Subject 92 needs rest." "No," M. Delight snapped. "He needs truth." The technician ignored him. Another voice echoed from a speaker above, artificial and syrupy. "Subject THM-01 undergoing final adjustment. Facial integrity compromised. Proceeding with identity update." Thomas felt the screws in his faceplate begin to turn. "No, please no." With an unsettling pop, the familiar shape of his face, eyes, mouth, cheeks, was detached from his frame. He couldn't see what replaced it, but he could hear the gasps from M. Delight, the soft murmurs from the surgeons. "He's red," one muttered. "Experimental rebranding," said another. "We're testing visual impact." They held up a mirror. Thomas looked. He didn't recognize the engine in the reflection. His paint was crimson now, glossy and unnatural. His new face was symmetrical, hollow-eyed, with a perfect plastic grin molded into place. His pupils had been resized, repositioned. They didn't blink in sync. This wasn't him. He was watching a stranger wear his face. M. Delight's voice cracked. "You're not broken. They just want you to believe that." The technicians had begun logging data, measuring Thomas's new responses to stimuli. Flashing lights, recorded laughter, distant train whistles. His system didn't respond. Not because it was malfunctioning, because there was nothing left in him to respond. But then, something sparked. A faint memory. A voice. "Peep, peep, I'm ready to be really useful." His first words. The real ones. Before the patches. Before the experiments. Before the fixing. His engine growled. Just a little. The restraining bolts on his wheels hissed from pressure. Then M. Delight did something wild. He yanked a scalpel from one of the tool trays, and with a shriek that blended rage and desperation, he lunged at the control console on the far wall. "No more fixing," alarm screamed. Sparks flew, the lights dimmed, and Thomas felt the bolts holding him loosen. One by one, he moved. Slightly, but enough. He was still there. Somewhere inside the plastic, the wires, the overwritten identity, Thomas was still alive. The moment the power flickered, Thomas surged forward. It wasn't much, just a twitch of the wheel, a jolt of steam forced through a clogged pipe. But it was enough to tip the surgical tray beside him. The sound of metal tools hitting the floor rang out like a firecracker in a chapel. Chaos erupted. The surgeons convulsed in stuttering animation loops. Their arms flailed without rhythm. One's head glitched sideways, vanishing for a split second before snapping back. The control panel behind Thomas exploded in sparks as M. Delight smashed through it with the scalpel, screaming something about versions and scrap scripts. The clamps holding Thomas down clicked once, then again. And then, they opened. He rolled forward, slow at first, gears grinding like old bones. His new crimson paint glinted under the pulsing red light. He felt wrong, heavy, hollow. But beneath the overlays, beneath the rewrites, a single line of code. His core, had survived. "I'm Thomas," he whispered through a broken voice box. "I remember." The moment his wheels hit the floor, the sirens started. Facility breach, reconstructed subject unstable. Lockdown initiated. From the ceiling, mechanical arms deployed. Armed not with tools, but with syringes, drills, and face molds, twitching in anticipation. They moved fast, like a hive reacting to threat. Delight ducked behind a toppled cabinet. "Go," he shouted. "Find the others." Thomas revved his engine. Sparks spit from his joints. He launched forward, smashing through a glass wall, metal scraping against the narrow hallway beyond. His mind raced. His memory flickered. There had been others. James, Emily, Toby. He had to know if they were still. A scream cut through the hallway. Not mechanical. Not synthetic. Real. Thomas followed the sound. It led him down a corridor of discarded character shells. Broken faces stared at him from metal racks. Versions of himself, unfinished. One had 3 eyes. Another had no mouth at all. They twitched slightly, as if some part of them still wanted to function. He found Percy first, or what was left. The green engine was bolted into a rotating cylinder, his wheels stripped clean, his paint dulled to gray. His faceplate was half peeled, showing wires and mesh underneath. His eyes blinked, but the movement was lagged, forced. Thomas pulled forward. "Percy!" Percy's head jerked. A burst of static shot from his speaker, then Toma. The sentence collapsed mid-echo. From behind, one of the surgeons had followed. It moved without footsteps, just a glide. Thomas didn't hesitate. He reversed hard, slamming his back carriage into the figure. The surgeon shattered into unfinished animation fragments, code spilling like blue blood, disintegrating into pixel dust. "Get up, Percy," Thomas growled. But Percy couldn't move. The rot had gone too deep. He was still alive, still seeing, but not truly there anymore. "I'll come back for you," Thomas whispered. He didn't know if it was true, but he said it anyway. He pushed onward. Room after room, hallway after hallway. The facility revealed its true face. It wasn't a repair center. It was a reprogramming lab. And not just for physical fixes. It was rewriting characters. Personalities, memories, voices. Scripts hung from the walls, each titled in sterile text. Useful engine, reskin. Redesign V3, emotion dampening test set A. Thomas felt sick. This wasn't about fixing animation. This was about control. A voice echoed through the system now, calm, clinical. THM-01, your update is incomplete. Return for patching. Thomas roared. "I'm not your subject." From the shadows ahead, another shape moved. Large. Square. Groaning. Gordon, but twisted. His boiler was enlarged, his eyes blank white. His mouth sealed shut with metal threads. He was charging like a bull, massive and mindless. Thomas had no time to run, so he faced him. Wheels locked, steam hissed. "Come on, then." The 2 engines collided. Metal screamed. Thomas's face cracked again, the new mask breaking under the force. Gordon's bulk sent him flying, but he twisted mid-air, landing hard beside a vat of rejected fuel. An idea hit. He triggered his core. Flames returned, this time controlled. He dragged his frame toward the sparking wires overhead, yanked them free, and plunged them into the vat. The fireball that followed lit the entire sublevel like a second sun. Gordon collapsed, his form finally stilled. But Thomas didn't stop. He knew now. He wasn't escaping a facility. He was ending it. The explosion lit the underbelly of the facility in flickering hues of red and white. Smoke filled the tunnels. Thomas rolled out of the wreckage, scorched, dented, coughing thick steam with every wheeze of his half-melted funnel. The crimson paint job was blistered now, chipping away in flakes to reveal slivers of his original blue beneath. Not enough to make him feel whole, but enough to remind him he hadn't been erased. Alarms screamed across every floor. Anomaly active, code breach, identity corruption detected. As he pushed deeper through the corridor, distorted audio logs played from the walls like broken echoes from the past. Voices of the executives behind the so-called animation suite. If the subjects maintain emotional consistency, we preserve marketable identity. If they deviate, we correct. Duliciwan was showing signs of unscripted behavior. Reprogram his smile. If he resists, burn the backups. Thomas stared ahead. A final set of blast doors blocked the heart of the system. The voice inside him whispered, "This is it." He revved harder. Piston pressure maxed. Every bolt in his frame screamed. He was shaking apart, but he didn't care. He slammed through the doors. Inside, the true core. A cathedral of screens. Endless loops of smiling Thomases blinking in unison, each on a different track, each saying the same line. "I'm Thomas and I'm always really useful." Some glitched mid-sentence. Others bled into corrupted color. Thomas rolled forward. His voice, torn, choppy, broke through. "No." He stared up at the monitors. "You're not me." Suddenly the room went dark. Then cold. Then alive. A figure lowered itself from the ceiling. An amalgamation of every Thomas redesign. Oversized wheels, patchwork metal, 3 faces rotating slowly around a shared head frame. A voice spoke in unison. "You are version 0, we are evolution." Thomas backed up. "Identity isn't made by paint or lines of script," he whispered. "It's what survives when they take all that away." The amalgam roared, voice glitching with overlapping catchphrases and distorted whistles. It lunged forward. Thomas didn't run. He drove into it. The impact rocked the system. Monitors shattered. Code poured like static rain. The air turned electric. He dug into its core, tearing away faces, plates, false smiles. "I remember who I am," he screamed, even as his voice box gave out. The machine faltered. Sparks burst from its center. And in its final moment, as it collapsed in a burst of corrupted light and decaying sound, Thomas saw his reflection in the broken glass. No longer red, no longer perfect. His face was cracked. His eyes were uneven. His frame bent. But he smiled, genuinely, and whispered, barely audible, "Still me." Behind him, the system collapsed. Entire corridors of the facility flickered and disappeared, deleted forever. The lights failed, one by one, until only the glow of emergency beacons remained. Thomas rolled through the ruins, past the wreckage of twisted mascots, past the screen still trying to play reruns of his past life, back to the surface, where the sky finally looked blue again. He didn't know what came next, whether the others would remember him, whether Percy could still be saved, whether M. Delight was even still alive. But he had something now that none of the code could overwrite, his will. And somewhere deep in his gears he felt it again. That beat, that steam, that hum. Thomas. Just Thomas. Not version 1. Not Reskin 3. Just the engine that refused to be erased.